I've worked security at Walmart for a little over 5 years now. Mostly nights. It's not glamorous. You walk the perimeter, check the locks, monitor the cameras, maybe deal with a raccoon in the garden center or a teenager trying to sneak in through the auto bay. It's boring, but boring is good. I usually worked solo until management brought in a second overnight guard last year, a guy named Luis Mendoza. Ex-Army. Good guy. Sharp. Quiet, but steady. You learn to appreciate that on the graveyard shift. We'd alternate patrols while the others stayed in the office watching the feeds. This night started like any other. It was Thursday, just past 11 p.m., and the store had shut down an hour earlier. Employees were gone, auto lights dimmed, and we were locked in from the inside. Standard protocol, both of us had keys and a direct line to dispatch in case of any alarms or emergency calls. Luis was finishing his rounds while I sipped coffee from a paper cup, watching the camera feeds inside the little security office tucked in between the electronics stockroom and receiving bay. One camera showed the front entrance. Another looked over the garden center. One was posted high above the grocery aisles. The others were split between warehouse storage and emergency exits. Nothing looked out of place. I remember thinking how quiet it was even for a Thursday. No clanks from settling shelves, no compressors kicking on. Just the hum of fluorescent lights and the soft buzz of the monitors. Then, around 12:17 a.m., I heard something. Not through the cameras. Through the walls. A metallic bang, faint but clear. Like someone had dropped a dolly or a shelf bracket. I leaned closer to the warehouse feed. Nothing moving. No motion alerts. Just rows of pallets and sealed cardboard. I keyed the mic. "Luis, you back in range?" A moment later, his voice crackled through. "Yeah. Just locking the fire exit by toys." "What's up?" "Thought I heard something in the warehouse." "Far side. Buy seasonal stock." Silence for a beat. Then, "I'll check it." Probably one of the overhead pipes settling again. "Copy," I said and leaned back. I kept an eye on camera 12 loading bay and the back of warehouse storage. No movement. Just boxes stacked to the ceiling, shadowed under industrial lights. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. No sign of Luis. I tapped the mic. "Luis? You copy?" Nothing. I waited, leaned forward, toggled a few of the camera angles manually. Still nothing. Camera 14, which covers the back corner near the seasonal aisle and freight elevator, was dark. Not out, just blacked by shadow. The corner where the emergency bulb had been flickering for the past month. I'd filed a report. No one ever fixed it. I tried again. "Luis, confirm status." "You good?" Nothing. Now I was uneasy. Luis wasn't the type to ignore a check-in. If he'd found something, he would have called it in. Even a false alarm. I stood up, clipped my badge to my belt, and slid my keys into my jacket pocket. Grabbed a flashlight, industrial mag light, heavy enough to double as a baton, and stepped into the hallway. The stillness hit me hard. It was that kind of silence where your own breathing feels loud. I passed empty aisles, displays half-stocked from the evening rush. The overheads were set to power saving, casting every aisle in a sickly, low-watt glow. I walked through electronics, past the roll-down gates, and into the warehouse access hall. No sound. No motion. Just cool air and dust. I reached the warehouse door and paused. Listened. Nothing. Then I opened it. The warehouse was massive open space stretching half the store length, divided by stacks of pallets, shrink-wrapped towers of bulk stock, and metal shelves. I swept my flashlight slowly. "Luis?" No answer. I stepped forward, boots echoing faintly on the concrete. Then something caught my eye. A black coat. Just the hem, disappearing behind a row of pallets near the receiving area. Not Walmart blue. Not employee issue. Long hooded. I froze. This wasn't right. I turned the light toward the corner and stepped closer. And that's when I saw movement. 3 figures, not running, not sneaking. Just moving with purpose. All in dark coats. Hoods up. Faces shadowed. They didn't look back. They were carrying something. A long case. Metal. They weren't employees. They weren't delivery. They were not supposed to be here. I backed up, keyed the mic again. Dispatch, this is store 1986, requesting immediate police response. Intruders on site, warehouse access. Possibly armed. No reply. I checked the radio. Dead. Then a hand grabbed my shoulder. I turned, swinging the flashlight, ready for anything. It was Luis. His face was pale. Sweating. He whispered, "Don't say a word. You didn't see them. You didn't see what they're doing." I pulled Luis behind the nearest stack of plastic totes, heart pounding like a bass drum in my throat. "What the hell is going on?" I whispered. He shook his head, eyes scanning the dark warehouse. "Keep your voice down," he said. "There's more than 3. I froze. "More?" He pointed toward the far end, behind the seasonal stock wall, where the freight elevator was. I counted at least 6. Maybe more. All dressed the same. Moving gear. Heavy cases. My mind raced. "Why didn't you radio me?" "I tried. Jammed." He held up his walkie, a red light blinking, no response. "Same with my phone. They've got a signal jammer." That made my blood run cold. People don't just accidentally carry signal jammers into a lockdown Walmart at midnight. That's equipment you buy on the dark web, not Amazon. This wasn't theft. This was planned. "Did they see you?" I asked. Luis nodded slowly. "One of them. Not sure if he knew I was staff." I ducked behind the floor jacks. Played like I was inventory. He wasn't panicking, but I could see it in his face. The same way I'd seen guys look in Iraq years ago. Hyper-aware. Not scared, just preparing for something bad. That's when the lights flickered. Only for a second, but enough to make every shadow in the warehouse stretch like claws. We both looked up. Overhead fluorescents buzzed back to life. Then immediately dimmed again, like someone was controlling them. I grabbed my flashlight and clicked it off. No sense painting a target. "Let's get eyes," Luis whispered. We moved slow, silent. We stuck low, slipping between pallets of paper towels and unsold patio furniture, heading toward the seasonal section where Luis had last seen them. He stopped me with one hand, then pointed. I peeked around the edge of a tall shelf and saw them again. 7 this time. All in long black coats. Not masks exactly, more like dark tactical balaclavas. No skin showing. Gloved. Headlamps covered with red filters. No ID. No insignias. They were unloading the metal cases. I counted 4 of them, long, narrow. Some kind of containers. One of them cracked open a case. Inside was something metallic. Cylindrical. Like a short fuel canister or air tank, but with nozzles, wires, and what looked like a pressure gauge. Not weapons. Not explosives. Equipment. And they were installing it, one at each corner of the warehouse. Bracketing it. Framing it. Luis leaned in. "I've seen those before." My eyes narrowed. "Where?" He hesitated. "During a hazmat training exercise. Not standard units, military-grade atmospheric isolators. Custom-made." I stared at him. Why the hell would they need those here? He shook his head. "That's what I'm trying to figure out." We backed off. Needed a plan. The front doors were locked from the inside, and even if we made it there, they had at least 2 figures posted near, receiving standing watch. No flashlights. Just there. "Break room," Luis said. "There's a backup line there. Hardwired. No wireless. Might still work." We moved. But just before we turned down the hallway past sporting goods, we heard a hiss. Air. Then a slow rising tone, like an old dial-up modem, deep and low. It was coming from one of the canisters. I glanced back toward the warehouse. A soft mist began to rise from the metal vents on top of the device. Colorless. Luis grabbed my arm. "Move. Now." We ran. Back through the hallway, ducking into the break room. Luis slammed the door and locked it. I grabbed the backup phone from the wall and hit 911. Nothing. Just static. Like the line was there, but dead. I dropped it. Luis checked the office desktop. Old. Dusty. Somehow still running. He fired up the login screen. Password protected. He cursed under his breath and typed something. I was pacing, heart hammering. What are they doing? That fog, what is it? Don't know, he said. But it's spreading. That canister? It's dispersing something. Could be airborne suppressant, nerve agent, gas? I felt my mouth go dry. Gas? Like a test? Or a purge, he said flatly. He got past the login. Opened the terminal. I watched him dig through the network, old security software, motion alert logs. Then he found something. A maintenance report filed just 2 days ago. Not from us. Not from corporate. From a user labeled Ops01. The request? Isolate stored 1986 perimeter. Disable comms. Prepare for field simulation. I felt sick. Luis turned to me. This store wasn't chosen by accident. Before I could respond, the hallway light snapped off. Complete blackness. Then footsteps. Slow. Measured. Coming closer. The footsteps in the hallway stopped just outside the break room. I held my breath. Luis stood next to me, crouched low, crowbar in one hand, flashlight off. We waited. No knock. No voice. Just silence. Then came a sound I can't describe in any normal way. Not footsteps. Not breathing. More like a vibration, but internal. Like something low and ancient humming behind the drywall, almost in the bones of the building. Passed in seconds, but it left me cold. Luis whispered, "Did you feel that?" I nodded. Then he did something strange. Something I didn't expect. He pulled something out of his pocket. Pendant. Bronze or copper. Dark with age. Circular. Etched with symbols I didn't recognize. Lines spiraling inward. No words. He pressed it into his palm, closed his eyes, and muttered something. "Luis." He opened his eyes. "Don't ask." That shook me more than the hallway noise, because Luis doesn't rattle. And whatever this was, he'd prepared for it. We slipped out through the side exit of the break room, quietly, carefully, and took the long route back to the camera office. I had to see the feeds again, see how much the fog had spread. It wasn't just the warehouse anymore. It was creeping down the aisles, rolling low across the linoleum, thin, like morning mist in a field. Except this wasn't nature. This was deliberate, and it didn't set off the smoke detectors, didn't trip the alarms. It moved like it belonged here. We reached the office. Luis scanned his badge. Door unlocked. The monitors were still online. But something was wrong. Each feed was slightly out of sync, maybe half a second delayed. Like watching yourself move in a mirror that's just slow enough to be off. The employees weren't visible anymore. Neither were the intruders. But the fog was on every screen. Worse, in some of the feeds I saw us, not in real time, but walking where we'd already been. And in one feed, camera 8 covering aisle 23, we saw ourselves standing completely still, facing the lens. Luis looked at me. "That's not live." I rewound the feed. Nothing. That version of us only existed in that exact frame. I fast-forwarded. Gone. "What is this?" I whispered. Luis stared at the screen like it might blink. "They're doing something to the timeline." I laughed short, broken. "What, like time travel?" "No," he said. "Like repetition, reflection. Something about this place is cycling, looping. That fog. It's not just gas. I stepped back from the monitors. "You're not making sense, man." "I know," he said, "but I'm not wrong." We decided to get out. No more playing smart. No more cameras. We were alone in a sealed building with something running beneath the surface, and I didn't want to wait around to figure out what phase came next. We made for the fire exit near the garden center, the only one not braced with steel from the outside. It was hot to the touch. I pushed against the bar and it opened. Fresh air rushed in. The fog hadn't reached this far yet. Luis went first. I followed. We stepped outside into the loading area behind the store. Empty. Stars above. Quiet. I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath until I let it out. Then we heard whispers. Not speech. Whispers. Plural. Dozens. They weren't coming from around us. They were coming from above. We looked up, and there, at the edge of the store's roof, were 3 of them. Hooded. Long coats. Still. Just watching. No lights on them. No gear in hand. Just presence. Then one of them raised its arm and pointed. Not at us. At the moon. And then it lowered its hand and pointed at the ground. I blinked, and they were gone. Luis gripped my arm. "Back inside." "What?" "No, we're out." He pulled me back through the door. "No, we didn't leave. You don't get it. This place, this event, it's not over until they close the loop." I didn't argue, not because I believed him, but because I saw the same fog starting to seep under the dumpster at the far end of the lot. It was everywhere. Back inside, we heard the freight elevator grinding down. We moved fast, hugging the dark, sliding behind shelving units and broken cardboard bins. The elevator opened. 2 of them stepped out, not in coats this time, in blue vests, store uniforms. Perfect. Pressed. New. No faces. Just hoods where faces should be. They walked like employees, moved like staff, rolled carts into the center of the floor. On top were rows of boxes, each sealed in white tape. Each box labeled, "Merch Reset, Cycle 3", and the tape, printed with words, tiny, repeating. I leaned in and read it. "Inventory is identity. Obey the reset. Forget the roll." Luis whispered, "They're not stealing anything. They're rewriting the place." The words on the tape kept repeating in my head. Inventory is identity. Obey the reset. Forget the roll. Luis and I crouched behind a pallet of boxed space heaters, watching as the figures moved with slow, practiced precision. They weren't rushing. They weren't nervous. They were confident, because they'd done this before. The carts were lined up in perfect symmetry. Each box stacked and turned the same direction. A ritual in retail disguise. Luis whispered, "This is why no one talks about the overnight shift." I looked at him. He wasn't joking. He tapped his vest. "You ever met the guy who used to have this job? Before you?" I shook my head. "Exactly," he said. We moved again, ducking into housewares, skirting past frozen foods, everything dim, coated in a layer of haze now. The fog was thicker. Not choking, not chemical, just present, like a veil hanging over the real world. We made it back to the security office. And everything was different. Not messy. Not ransacked. Just off. The monitor layout had changed. The wall clock no longer ticked. And the photo taped to the side of the screen, the one of my kid? Gone. In its place was a corporate stock photo. 2 smiling employees standing beneath the Walmart banner. And one of them looked like me. But I never posed for that photo. Luis backed away from the monitor. No. That wasn't there. I clicked through the cameras. There was no feed anymore. Just a looping message. Team onboarding in progress. finalizing guest roles. I looked at Luis. They're replacing us. He nodded. Piece by piece. We needed proof. Evidence. Anything. Luis moved to the filing cabinet in the corner and pulled open the bottom drawer. Nothing inside, except one single item. A blue vest. Folded. Pressed. With a name tag. Evan, Apparel. He stared at it. I stared at it. I never worked apparel, I said. Luis didn't say anything. He just opened the next drawer. Another vest. Luis, Frozen Foods. He whispered, this isn't just a store anymore. It's a system. What do they want? To rewrite us, he said. To turn us into placeholders. Faceless, friendly employees. Like everyone else who disappeared. He held up the vest. They don't erase you. They assign you. They file you. We heard the ding of the overhead speakers. The first sound in over an hour. And then a voice, chirpy, corporate, smooth as silk. Welcome to Cycle 3. Please collect your assigned uniform and proceed to zone onboarding. Your new role is waiting. I looked at Luis. He was already backing toward the door. We have to get out? Right now. We ran for the stock elevator, dodging rows of empty carts and perfectly faced shelves. But the store had changed. Every aisle was now numbered differently. Products had shifted. Signs hung where they didn't belong. Exit lights blinked red. And every mirror now reflected something slightly off. I passed one and caught a glimpse of myself. Except it wasn't me. It was me in the vest. Smiling. Staring back. I didn't stop. We reached the freight elevator. Luis swiped his badge. Nothing. Swiped again. Still nothing. The panel blinked. Access denied. Role not verified. He slammed the door with his fist. That's when the figures arrived. Not running. Not lunging. Just appearing, one by one, at the end of the hallway. Coats gone. Now fully dressed in Walmart uniforms. Perfect blue vests. Plastic name tags. All smiling. But not one face was familiar. And their name tags didn't have names. Just departments. Toys. Deli. Stockroom. Pharmacy. Luis pulled the pendant from his pocket again. The spiral-etched one. He whispered something under his breath and stepped in front of me. The figures didn't move. Just stood there, smiling. Until one of them tilted its head and said in a soft, mechanical voice, "You're not assigned. Guests cannot decline onboarding." Then, as if on cue, every fluorescent light in the corridor flickered. And the fog rushed in. We bolted. Back through the store, disoriented, every aisle the same. Luis shouted, "Garden Center." "There's a hatch." "What?" "In the greenhouse shed. Emergency access. Old maintenance tunnel." "How do you know that?" "I don't know how. I just remember." We ran. The garden center was wide open. No staff. No music. Just plants, plastic, identical, endless, and rows of bags marked Cycle 3 Growth Media. We found the shed. Luis pried it open with the crowbar. Inside, a concrete square hatch in the floor, marked Authorized Only. We didn't hesitate. I climbed down the steel rungs, Luis behind me. The hatch slammed shut above us. And then, for the first time in hours, complete silence. We landed in a concrete tunnel. Utility pipes. Electrical panels. Dust and spider webs. Old. Forgotten. But real. And below the store, Luis leaned against the wall, breathing hard. "We're out of range. Whatever that system is, it can't reach us down here." I asked, "Where does this go?" He shrugged. "Depends on the store." I stared at him. "What do you mean, store?" He looked up at me. Dead serious. "You think this only happened here?" The tunnel was narrow, barely wide enough to walk shoulder to shoulder. It smelled like damp concrete, old air, and something I can only describe as stale static. Not a scent exactly. More like the echo of something digital trying to rot. We walked in silence. The only sounds were our boots on concrete and the occasional buzz from failing overhead utility bulbs. Luis was walking ahead, his pendant still in his hand, eyes scanning every junction like he'd memorized them, though he never said how. Finally, I broke the silence. How did you know this was here? He didn't answer for a few steps. Then, this isn't the first store I've seen go dark. He told me about a store in El Paso, Walmart Supercenter 1446. 3 years ago. Same kind of thing. Late night shift. Signal dead zones. Figures in coats. Cameras looping. He hadn't worked security there. He'd been inventory staff, fresh out of the army. They did something back then, he said. A partial reset. Not like this. But close. People just forgot. Managers got transferred. Whole system got upgraded. But the employees? Half of them changed. Blank. Like they weren't behind their own eyes anymore. And you? I asked. I faked a breakdown. Got transferred. Quit 2 weeks later. I've been waiting ever since. I stared at him. Waiting for what? Luis stopped walking. There was a steel door ahead, dented, unlabeled. An old access panel beside it, long since powered down. He turned to me. For it to happen again. Somewhere else. He forced the door open with his crowbar. Beyond it was not a tunnel. Not utility lines. But a room. Huge. Circular. Carved into stone. Not concrete. Not tile. Stone. I felt the temperature drop as we stepped in. It didn't feel like we were under a Walmart anymore. It felt like we were beneath the map. The walls were lined with cubbies, like catacombs, but instead of bones or urns, each niche held an item. A folded vest. A name tag. A pair of black shoes. A coiled receipt roll. A department sign. Hundreds of them. Some dusty. Some pristine. Each cubby had a brass plate beneath it, labeled with names and rolls. I walked past a row and stopped. Miranda, Electronics. Tomas, Pharmacy. Malik, Stockroom. Evan, Apparel. I stared at the last one. Luis turned to look. It's a vault, he said. For memory. In the center of the chamber, there was a table, stone, polished. On top of it, something had been carved deep into the surface. A spiral with department names etched into its arms. Electronics. Bakery. Receiving. Lawn and garden. Apparel. Health and beauty. At the center, management. Luis ran his fingers over the stone. Every store has a spiral. It's just hidden. Buried. But it's part of the blueprint. Why? I asked. He looked at me. Because every system needs a core. And this one runs on cycles. It resets. Not just products. People. Roles. Places. Memory. Every now and then, it sheds the old floor plan and replaces it. I took a step back. And we got caught in the reset. Luis nodded. We weren't supposed to make it to cycle 3. Suddenly, the air shifted. A vibration like the one before rose up from the stone beneath our feet. The spiral on the table began to glow faintly. A soft bluish white, like scanner light from a register. And a voice, not through speakers this time. Just there. Not male. Not female. Just clean. Unfiled roles detected. Finalizing onboarding. Proceed to your assigned department. The far wall of the chamber began to open, stone sliding soundlessly. Behind it, an elevator. No buttons. Just a white light inside. Luis grabbed my arm. Don't step in. I shook my head. We can't stay here. We won't. He stepped forward, dropped the pendant onto the spiral on the table. It landed with a dull clink. The light changed, shifted, slowed, then dimmed. The voice paused. Override protocol. Unrecognized. Conflict. Stand by. Luis looked at me. This isn't just about one store. There are hundreds. Built over these spirals. And whatever's running it, it feeds on the loop. On identity. On obedience. He handed me his flashlight. I'm not going back up. What? I've seen too many of these cycles start. But never from the inside. You need to leave. You still remember who you are. I stepped toward him. Don't. Please. The elevator lit up brighter. Evan, apparel. Please return to floor level. Your shift is about to begin. He looked at me and smiled, real, tired, human. Go. Don't look back. And I did. The elevator brought me back up into the stockroom. No fog. No coats. No figures. Just boxes. Just silence. I walked through the aisles untouched, clean. Shelves stocked. Registers dark. At the front entrance, I pushed open the doors. They opened without resistance. Outside, it was still night. Or maybe night again. There were cars in the lot. Lights in the distance. A world still running. I looked back once. The sign overhead still read Walmart. But under it, a new banner hung. Now hiring, apparel, electronics, frozen foods. My name tag was still in my hand. I dropped it and walked away.